Cool. Now we are in action.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mary, Courtney, Hillary, Lauren, thank you guys for jumping on. This will hopefully be fairly short and sweet.
Okay.
Again, no sort of formal agenda other than just kind of looking back at where we've been, answering any questions about the personas, and then maybe looking ahead a little bit at the objective work and the journey map. And just so I'll give a brief sort of overview and context on that project to come, and then
Okay.
because it's a smaller group, we can sort of dive into some specific projects and questions. So really, I guess we're at this point of sort of transitioning out of our early analysis work. Obviously, analysis sort of flows through a lot of different components, but sort of from the formal analysis only sort of devoted work, we're moving sort of past that and transitioning into sort of our early design work. So the sort of first step in that work is really nailing down, like, what is this core goal that we're going after, and then what are the very measurable objectives that we can try to hit on with our project. And so that's really the main focus here coming up is overarching goal, 3 to 5 objectives. Again, that's rough. You should have at least 3. I've seen a lot of projects where folks may have 6 to 10. I've seen some where you have sub-objectives. So in fact, I know there's a couple projects where you're maybe even looking at having like a dual sort of dual channel solution in a way, where you're sort of addressing different things with different groups. In that case, you might have an overarching objective for sort of one piece of the projects that maybe has 1 or 2 sub-objectives, and then another that has 1 or 2. So you can get creative and playful with how you build out these objectives. But again, with a baseline of 3 to 5, and really keying in on ensuring that they are smart. So that's just a framework that's nice to reference, but it's worth sort of peeking back at any objectives that you've thought through or been building out, and ensuring that they are specific. So that's the S. Measurable, and this comes back to some of the verb work. There's some resources available, and obviously a ton more online around just how to build out useful verbs that can sort of drive at a useful objective. So smart, measurable. The A would be achievable. So ensuring that whatever the objective is, that learners can actually achieve it. R would be sort of realistic, and then the T being time bound, and so there's some sort of just temporal element to the objectives. Is this something that they're meant to achieve within a week, within a year? So just giving a sense for a sort of time element. So that's sort of roughly, I guess, how to think about some of the objectives. And then the journey map sort of component of this is also giving an early visual sort of reference for how you see learners potentially maneuvering through your solution. These things can sort of work in tandem. A path analogy is used often. This does not have to be, this should not be your view of exactly how the ultimate instruction or solution will be built, but more just a general sense visually. And again, this is all, there's a fair amount of creativity open to how this sort of works, but some visual reference for how learners are navigating this potential solution, and specifically hitting on those objectives and sort of the overarching goal. So that's sort of rough framing around what we've got to come in this next project, and then obviously after that we're working towards the first draft of the entire solution design document. So keep that in mind too. With that, let's chat about any specific questions that come up around project 3, or anything else, other things that have come up with the analysis work or personas. I'll kind of turn it over to you guys for any questions at this point.
So I have a question about the objectives. Is it 3 to 5 objectives for each persona that we've created?
Nope. So so separate now at this point, the personas are really the analysis work. You're just gaining, that's really the empathy piece, obviously. You're gaining an understanding of who these learners are. The objectives should be tied directly now to the solution. So that's our transition into more of the design. Yep. So obviously the learners will be represented within those. They're going to be the ones, those objectives are sort of meant to target. But we can kind of look at the full scope of our audience now. Yeah. So
should there be objectives throughout the journey map? Such as at this phase, this is one objective, the next phase, this is another objective?
That is an approach if it makes sense. And again, this is just going to be dependent on your solution and your project. But if there's like a sort of progression in the way you see learners, like they need to kind of build some foundational skill before maybe, moving on, then yeah, you might have sort of that sort of sequence where it's, they're at this early stage, here's the objective, they're moving on, here's the objective. But, some solutions are more organic in nature where it's more of a choose your own adventure, and they might address different points at different times. And in that case, the objectives might just be sort of broad and overarching and sit over the top of everything. So yeah, I think that's a perfectly logical approach in that sort of sequencing strategy, but it really depends on your solution. And we can chat through yours specifically, Mary, if you want, or but if yeah.
So I've seen some journey maps online that are templates. Is that something, if that kind of helps us flesh out the journey map, that we can look at, is using a template?
Sure. Yep. With the caveat being just ensure that it would then sort of visually map back into your broader design document.
Okay.
So as long as it feels cohesive and that it will supplement sort of how the rest of the components will come together, then yeah. Okay. There's a ton of great templates out there, yeah.
Okay. Great.
Other questions or thoughts?
And what is the difference between the learning goal and the objectives? Is the goal the ultimate solution to the problem, and then the objectives are sort of sub goals that go with the overarching goal?
Yeah, I think sort of parent and child is probably an okay way to look at it, where the goal is really, it represents the sort of North Star that you're pointing at with the entire solution, versus the objectives then really should be more granular, and you're addressing specific, and a lot of this is going to come out, it should be reflective directly, the work that you did with the personas and what you learned of what these learners potentially need. The objectives should sort of target some of those specific needs. That was why for a few groups I sort of really dove into like what is, trying to get folks to really dig into what the unique aspects are of your particular learner group, and trying to be as specific about like what's interesting, what's unique about the learners that you're looking to sort of provide instruction for, and then the objectives can really be tailored to meet those specific needs. So objectives should be fairly granular. It shouldn't be help build the skills necessary to build a useful website, right? Like that's just, that could apply to everything, right? Any web component. So yeah, I think you're looking at it right though. Goal as the overarching, and then sort of the objectives meeting more granular needs underneath it.
Okay.
Will we have to write an assessment for this?
Yes, so that will come a bit later, and that's probably something I can mention. The draft of the design document, there's actually going to be some components that come later, and it's just easier for the sequencing of the course to have a little more time to dig into some of the assessment, some of the evaluation, some of those sorts of things after a draft of the full solution design comes out. So project 4 actually will have just some placeholders that will then address sort of in the second half of the course of looking at assessment and evaluation, and a storyboard component. So Yep, it'll come later. We've got a little ways to go, but you can certainly start. It's obviously good to start thinking about some of that now.
Okay, so we're just essentially like taking each approach of designing a full course. At the end of the class, we'll have a full course to present. That's really the end goal. And then each of these are just those little pieces of designing that full course. Am I following correctly?
Yeah, so I guess the one thing I'll say is we're looking to design a plan for how instruction would ultimately get implemented. It may be a course, and in your case it is, but for others it may not be. There's any number of solutions that we could ultimately be looking to build, and we're really building the foundational document that could be used to ultimately create the final solution. We're not building out the full solution. Again, I'm not going to stop you if you feel like some are taking a very practical approach of things that are going to be useful, and in that case, you might start actually building some of this out. But it's all about that foundational planning and not building out the solution itself or the course itself in your case.
Okay.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then later on, we put together the final design project, similar to some of the examples that are on Canvas.
Yeah. The sort of progression will be objectives and journey maps coming next. That just gives us all a good foundation of like, are we really trying, basically what I'm going to look for there is like, are the objectives you're looking to achieve mapped, and are they representative of the audience and the analysis work you did?
Okay.
And then after that, it's going to be get a full draft of the design document up. That's sort of the midway point in the course, but that's project 4. We'll then layer in some added elements, the sort of some of the assessment strategies and evaluation, and then also a more specific storyboard. And then ultimately, yeah, we'll still work towards a final draft of the document, but the last piece will be a display, and it's going to be more of a media-based display of where we sort of have been.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the ultimate goal, is to get to a point where we have, a finalized solution design plan that could ultimately be, presented, handed over to whatever the organization is, or the sort of client, the quote unquote client, but you could hand that plan over and they could say, oh, you guys as a design team, I like where you're headed, and we're going to fund, this is all hypothetical, but that's the plan. Then they'd say, yeah, we're going to fund your team to implement this solution. That would be sort of phase 2, out of scope of this course, but that would be the plan. Anything else, Hillary or Lauren, or thoughts, questions, course specific, or it doesn't even have to be, other thoughts, or how the semester's going. And if we feel like we'd rather just get some time back, then we can keep it short.
I had one question, Taylor.
Yeah.
For the final presentation, are we going to be doing like a voiceover on our, like, let's say PowerPoint or whatever we decide to do?
Yeah, that will, some of that obviously will get outlined in the requirements. Yeah. But yeah, it will be a media-based. In fact, everybody in your group will need to be present in some way, either audio or video. And so that's going to be up to you guys how you kind of break it up. But yeah, that's the plan with that final display, is everybody gets a chance to sort of chat about some component, or sort of just working through your process as a design team, and then ultimately presenting some components of the actual design document.
Okay, I just wanted to know so we can kind of plan from there. So.
Yep.
Thank you.
Audio or video. It's just bringing some sort of humanity behind your team to the front in displaying what you've worked on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah.
Can you give me an example of how you start the journey map? Does it start with possibly like a pre-assessment? Does it start with an activity engaging the learner in like figuring out what they know about a subject, or how does the journey map typically begin, or is it unique to the identified problem that we're trying to solve?
It's certainly a bit unique, but I think some sort of pre-assessment might, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Given what you've learned through some of the analysis work and the persona work, that you might want to build in some sort of early information gathering piece. That I've certainly seen a lot of that. But again, remember, like at this stage, we're really trying to nail down good objectives, and this isn't going to be a map of exactly how the solution will unfold. So you can keep it fairly high level and just sort of, the major sort of milestones or steps you can take. And it doesn't need, oh, you're dealing, you've got cat, I've got this.
She just walked across my lap.
She's shy, but she'll at least look and say hello. Yeah, so I think that's very obviously dependent on your approach and your solution, but I think you've got it. Okay. Some sort of I've seen so many different approaches, but I think just keep it at a high level. Don't try to map out every element of the solution at this stage. We're just sort of we're like in phase 1 of 4 of design, so we've got a little further to go. Once you do build out in project 4, as we're building out our drafts of the full design document, and you will map it in a little more specificity and really start thinking through all the pieces of what the solution will be. But for project 3, you don't have to go that deep.
Okay.
Anything else? And if there are no other questions, we can keep it short and sweet. And I'll just say, I know a few have been doing this, but certainly reach out if there's any just questions as far as workflow within your group. People have been great about, I know there's been some travel and other trips planned, and it seems like everyone's communicating and sort of sharing that information. But if there's any just group dynamic questions or anything like that, let's just get on a call like this with the full group and just chat through it.
Okay.
Cool. If there's nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording, and then we're chatting after this. I'm going to jump. I'm going to jump off and back in. Let me actually see what time we have. Let's jump back on at 6:30 if that's all right.
Okay, that's fine. Will you be sending a link then?
What's that?
Will you be sending a link then to jump back on?
Did we? I couldn't remember if we had settled on. I need to. I'll go look. I'll make sure I send something out. But anyway, yes, I will make sure we're clear on it. But we're gonna cut this one for the full group, and then we've got more time here planned. So thank you guys for jumping on. I know that these are just sort of ad hoc and as they work with certain folks. So helpful that a few of you can make it.
Okay, great.
All right, thanks.
Great.
We'll talk online.
We'll talk online. Thanks.
Right.
Bye.